Well, my name is Martina Sigrist Larsen and I work as an information officer at the Vasa Museum. And the Vasa Museum is in Stockholm in Sweden. A very special museum, unique in the way that we have one big real piece of history which is close to 400 years old. In this case it is a ship from the 17th century, a warship, a wooden warship. The size of it is around 69 meters of length. The width about 5 meters, and the height of the ship today in our time is about 25 meters. Originally the ship was actually the double 52 meters high, but we are today lacking the upper parts of the masts. The way it's been built, it can stand cannonballs from other ships. It's been made very properly, built very securely and properly. So I wouldn't say it was vanity, I'd say it was a ship to defend and to fight for the country. In the case of Vasa, the ship had originally 64 cannons altogether of different sizes. The ship was, as I mentioned before, a warship. The idea was to bring soldiers and armory from Sweden to wherever there was a fight, a battle or a war going on. And also on the ship there was the possibility of showing off, telling things about Sweden, making PR. And the ship is therefore decorated with hundreds of sculptures that are there to tell something. They symbolized wealth and power. Those were two important things that the Swedish king wanted to send out, sending messages to the nations around us, to the neighbor countries. Some of the neighbor countries were friends, others were enemies, and of course impressing both friends and enemies was important to keep your own position and to make sure that as few as possible would try to invade your own country and perhaps take over your throne being a king. So they were of great importance. To build Vasa, the work in total took about 2.5 years, which again, when we think about it, is not that much of time considering the size of the ship and all the material that was needed, collecting thousands of oaks, carving hundreds of sculptures. That was quite a complicated job to do, but altogether 2.5 years from the time they actually started building it until it was ready in 1628. The weather conditions on that day, when it all happened, were lovely. It was a sunny day, a Sunday. There was a light gust of wind, but not very much at all. So the weather was, in a way, perfect for going out on the maiden voyage. Then again, of course, a sailing ship needed wind, but there was a slight wind, so it was a good day for sailing. What happened after was that a good resume had to be done to tell the king what had happened to his new ship. It was an expensive ship. It spent a lot of money on this ship. The king at the time wasn't in Sweden. He was actually on the other side of the Baltic Sea waiting for Vasa. And once the letter reached him, he must have got quite angry. And of course demanded that some kind of investigation should be done. Later on, a couple of weeks after the catastrophe, an inquiry was held where as many people as possible that were responsible on board and that had survived the catastrophe, the sinking, were interrogated and asked. And they all basically gave the same statement, the same information. They had taken care of their part of all of this and made sure that the areas that they were responsible for were well managed. So in the end, no one could be blamed for it. It was very difficult in these inquiries to find just one single person to be blamed for all of this. So eventually, no one was found being scapegoat or. Shipbuilding at the time was more an art than a science in that sense, and building ships was difficult, complicated. Still they managed to build ships that sailed overseas with long journeys. And in the case of the Vasa, since it was the first time in Sweden that a ship of this size had been completed, then something somewhere went wrong, enough wrong to create a catastrophe. But what I can tell you that today we know, when Vasa left the Stockholm harbour, when she left the town, she had all the gun ports open, and the reason was that the people on board wanted to show off this beautiful ship with the lovely gun ports with sculptures on them, painted in bright colours and gilded with real gold. Now we know that if the ship would have had the gun ports closed, then this would never have happened. The catastrophe, the sinking, would not have happened. The ship would have been able to leave Stockholm, sail out, no matter how much wind basically, and she would have made it down to the other side of the Baltic Sea. Well, once Vasa had sunk in 1628, of course there was knowledge about the ship being down there on the seabed, and actually just after it had sunk, the place where she went down, the depth of the water there was about 30 meters, and the height of the ship itself was over 50 meters. So people could also see Vasa, or the upper parts of the mat sticking up above the water. Those parts were cut down, taken off, so the ship wouldn't be an obstacle in the harbour for other ships passing by. Then in 1952, a Swede called Anders Franzén, an engineer, but also we could call him a hobby archaeologist, who was very interested and very skilled in ships from this time, managed to read about Vasa and got so interested that he decided to actually go out and look for it, because he thought that it was probably still there in the harbour. And it took him a lot of research, a lot of time to find the ship. He started reading old documents in the library of Stockholm. Later on, he took his little rowing boat, rowing out into the harbour and actually looking for the Vasa in different spots, different places. And in 1956, he found the ship. So that's when the knowledge of Vasa in a bigger scale came back to the Swedish people again. The difference with Anders Franzén and the 1950s and 60s was that he realized that if Vasa could be brought up, salvaged and put back on land, then people would be able to see a real thing from 1628, the real ship. Research could be done. People could learn about Swedish history in another way than just by reading books and documents. And Anders Franzén he really worked hard to get people's interest and eventually to get money to make this operation possible, to bring up this big ship with the techniques that were in the 1950s and 60s. And he managed. A fantastic job, really an enormous effort that he pulled through. Somehow during the centuries, the ship fell over a little bit on one side and also got buried in the mud on the seabed. Also, a very important factor is the water in the Baltic Sea. It's brackish, which is a mixture of sweet water and salt water. And the amount of salt in the water is not that much. And due to this, small creatures like the shipworm, which is actually a little mussel, cannot live in the Baltic Sea. It lives in the Atlantic Ocean and more saltier seas, but in the Baltic it cannot live. And the shipworm eats wood. So in that sense, ships sinking in the Baltic Sea have a perfect position and perfect circumstances for being kept for hundreds and hundreds of years. When I talk to our conservators, they tell me that their goal is to keep Vasa for another 1,000 years. That is the goal, the aim that they have with all the work that they do today. And it is true that Vasa needs a lot of taking care of, and preservation has already been done earlier. When the ship came out of the water, it was sprayed for a long time, first with water but later on with a special preservation liquid. But another 1,000 years is the goal. Time I saw it, I was 7 years old and I was visiting the Vasa Museum with my grandpa. And it was not this building where we are today, it was the other older museum, which was more of a temporary building, a working site. And I remember clearly that I was not impressed at all, because in the old museum, the Vasa was being sprayed. This was in 1977, and she was being sprayed with the preservation liquid. So it was like enormous showers all over the ship, inside and outside. The second time I visited, I was in my early 20s, and I came into this building. And that's the first time that I really could see Vasa, the whole ship, and get the whole perspective. And then I said just what most visitors say when they come in through the doors: wow. Because that was stunning, amazing, fascinating. And I still get touched by it today. When I walk into the museum, when I walk around in here, being alone on my own or seeing all the other people watching Vasa, I still feel so much because it is a fascinating piece. It's something really unique. Vasa has about 1.2 million visitors every year, and it's an attraction that draws interest of all kinds of people, different nationalities, different ages, men and women. No matter where you come from, what your background is, most of them are interested in seeing Vasa, and once they come in here, they never get disappointed. When we ask our visitors what they think about the museum, we always get so much positive feedback and positive comments, which helps us make it even better. That gives us energy to make the Vasa Museum even better and to take care of the Vasa so that many more generations will come to see it.